Welcome to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, speaking to you from New York City on this, the 18th day of August, 2020. Before I talk more about today's show, I do like to remind you that I write a newsletter called Jay Taylor's Gold, Energy, and Tech Stocks, and you can subscribe to that by going to miningstocks.com. Miningstocks.com, we like to put in a plug for Chen Lin as well. Writes an excellent letter, has done very, very well for his subscribers over the years. What is Chen buying? What is Chen selling? And you can go to chenpicks.com for that subscription. And Michael Oliver will be with us a little later in the day, later in this hour, I should say. And that is olivermsa.com, where you need to go for Michael's work as well. I'd like to continue asking you to continue sending along any comments you have at questionsfortaylor@gmail.com, questionsfortaylor@gmail.com. If you're interested in our course, be sure to send a notice along for that so that we will be able to contact you as soon as we're ready to start making that available. We do want to thank our sponsors, today's sponsors, making this show economically viable: Benchmark Metals, NV Gold, Hannon Metals, Irving Resources, Novo Resources, Sitka Gold Corp., and Lion One Metals. I've titled today's show, Preparing for an Emerging American Dictatorship. Michael Oliver, Jeff Deist, and Jim Grieg return as guests for today's show. In our office today, we watched a video interview with Robert Kiyosaki, who says, and I quote, "America is heading for totalitarianism, and that he is expected and planning to flee America with his gold," end of quotes. You can access this very important video if you want to. You can go to jtaylormedia.com, and you can access this very important interview with Robert Kiyosaki, who actually came out of a tyranny. He was he was in Vietnam during the war, fighting on the American side, and then came to America after Vietnam was lost to the communists. So he brings with him some experience of totalitarian governments and the fear of those institutions. In The Fourth Turning, that's a book that was authored by William Strauss and Neil Howe, they predicted America is facing a tidal wave of change during which values held dear since World War II will be overturned. Indeed, it would seem we are now starting to see those changes with dictatorial commands that we stay locked in our homes and wear face masks, while a very reasonable and overall successful approach to the COVID-19 problem practiced in Sweden is cursed by an increasingly Marxist-leaning Democrat Party and their propaganda instruments at the Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, and MSNBC. Strauss and Howe suggest that no one individual or elite class of people can stop the sociological, economic, spiritual, and moral forces in play. Most certainly, Marxist groups supported by the Democratic Party and large internet corporations and the mainstream media in general are already destroying the safeguards of liberty, such as the First Amendment and Second Amendments. So, in fact, it won't matter, according to Strauss and Howe, it won't matter really which party prevails in the November 2020 elections, because a fourth turn in American history is inexorably underway, and the liberties of the past are already very rapidly being eroded as this fourth turning is apparently now getting underway. The idea that we as Americans would ever be forced to stay in our homes, not to be allowed to go to work, and being told that we must wear masks, face masks, when we are even when we're alone in our homes doing a Zoom meeting. This is a dystopian world beyond comprehension to me as a 73-year-old American who grew up in a conservative Ohio community. But this is the America that the Democrat Party and institutions that support it, like universities, major media, and increasingly large corporations in general, they seem to really relish this direction that we are heading into. Michael Oliver will be joining me in the second half of today's show to discuss his views of how many Americans may react to this new dystopia, this new dystopian anti-U.S. constitutional America that a growing number of Marxists in the Democrat Party are forcing Americans to accept. I might just, before I comment about our other two guests, Michael will be with me in the second half of today's show. A couple of other guests, I'll comment on them just briefly. But before I do, I would like to mention my Investing 101 Gold and Silver course, because the first two lessons in my course, which I have now filmed, discuss how the debasement of money and adaptation to Keynesian economics has set the stage for the ruination of free market capitalism, and as a result, the growing loss of peace and prosperity in America. Most certainly underlying the growing horror of death and destruction in major cities across America is a dysfunctional economy that is leading to the destruction of the middle class in favor of a ruling elite, and certainly hordes of young people with university degrees who see no prospects of being employed. The first two lessons in my course provide evidence of the connection between dishonest money and the growing levels of misery in America. The last three lessons of the course talk about products you can use to turn these nasty negatives from our ruling elite into ways to protect your wealth and possibly benefit from a massive transfer of wealth from fiat money to gold and silver, so that you will be in a better position to help your friends and family who may be in need in the dark days that seem to lie ahead. Again, if you have an interest in taking this course, please send an email along to us at questions the number 4 Taylor at gmail.com. Okay, now talking of ways to turn the current nasty economic negatives into positives, Jim Grieg of Benchmark Metals will be with me right after the first commercial break. Benchmark is in the process of defining a very large gold deposit on its Lawyers project in north central British Columbia. The company just recently announced a blockbuster drill intercept that graded 3.05 grams of gold per ton over 47 meters, and also announced some very strong metallurgical results. And just this morning, management announced an equity raise of some $21 million. Do you suppose investors are investing $21 million simply to push some holes in the ground if they don't think Benchmark is onto something major? Of course not. So looking forward to hearing, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jim Grieg has to say after a first commercial break coming up in just a few minutes from now. Now, I understand that Jeff Deist was supposed to be with me here in the first segment to talk about a piece that he recently wrote at the Mises Institute. And it has to do with why Fed bugs really, really hate gold. Jeff has written an article which you can read at the Mises Institute, and for some reason he has not been made available for this time at this point in time in the show. So I guess we can probably have Jeff back on another time. He certainly is a very good friend of mine and a very worthy guest, and we will have him on sometime in the future. But suffice it to say, I might just actually, I'd encourage you to read Jeff's article, Why Fed Bugs Really, Really Hate Gold. And that Judy Shelton, it's about Judy Shelton, who is a gold advocate and an economist who has been proposed for the Federal Reserve Bank by President Trump. And she has really coined the phrase Fed bugs. Fed bugs meaning instead of gold bugs. If you call me a gold bug, well, what does that make you, lovers of the Fed? That would make you a Fed bug. Anyway, it would be very worthy to read Jeff's article at the Mises Institute. But I might just mention, here's a comment from Alan Greenspan, who explained years ago why the establishment, why the Fed and the rest of the establishment hate gold. He said, in the absence, this is Alan Greenspan before he was, this was back in 1961, before he headed up the Federal Reserve Bank. He said, in the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value. He concluded his remarks, which was written in the Objectivist newsletter. He said, this is the shabby secret of the welfare statist triads against gold. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the hidden confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the statist antagonism toward the gold standard, end of quotes. So Alan Greenspan knew very well that getting rid of the gold standard allowed the confiscation of property rights of individuals. But a confiscation that not one in a million people really understood was happening. And so this is what has been going on. And we've seen a massive redistribution of wealth from those that earn it, those that create it, the miners, the manufacturers, the farmers, the inventors, to the people that control the wealth, that is the government and the Federal Reserve, that is Wall Street and Washington. So we've had this massive redistribution of wealth from the middle class to the elites. And those elites are really pushing very hard for socialism now. Why socialism? Well, because they're well protected. They are the elites. And just as in the Communist Party of Russia, the elites did very well. They took care of themselves. But the masses of people were headed to slavery. Well, we as an American people, I'm afraid, are headed to slavery, debt enslavement, thanks to Keynesian economics, and getting Nixon taking us off the gold standard after Roosevelt did that earlier from the domestic gold standard, and then taking away the international gold standard. And so we have had this massive redistribution of wealth in both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. The Republicans haven't been much better. Save for Ron Paul, there have been virtually no one in the last number of decades that have stood for honest money. And so we have seen our country disintegrate from a bastion of free market capitalism, liberty, and justice for all, into a system of socialism and even Marxism, which it seems a large part of the Democrat Party is very much in favor of.